Jezebel's demise was a day unlike any other in Jezreel, an ancient city and the capital of the northern kingdom of Israel. This day would mark the execution of the infamous Jezebel, the primary instigator of Baal worship in the house of Ahab. Baal was the god revered throughout Canaan and Phoenicia in ancient times. During the period of the Judges, Baal worship infiltrated Jewish religious life and became widespread in Israel during Ahab's reign. Different regions worshipped Baal in various ways, and Baal proved to be a highly versatile god. Various localities emphasized one or another of his attributes and created specialized sects of Baal worship. These local Baals were considered responsible for agriculture, creatures, and human fertility. In the Old Testament, the title Baal is primarily used to refer to the great god of the Canaanite pantheon, often equated with Hadad, the Amorite god with nearly identical nature and functions. Jezebel was a curse to the country, inciting her husband and sons to do evil. She killed the Lord's prophets and led many astray. Her reign lasted for 3 reigns, but her day of reckoning had finally arrived. In the church of Thyatira, a false prophetess was compared to Jezebel and called by her name. Revelation 2:20 states, "But I have this against you, that you tolerate the woman Jezebel, who calls herself a prophetess and is teaching and seducing my servants to practice sexual immorality and to eat food sacrificed to idols." Jezebel's end was as terrible as her life. Just as she had destroyed the idolaters and persecutors, so she was destroyed. Revelation 17:5-6 describes her as Babylon the Great, the mother of prostitutes and of earth's abominations. "And I saw the woman drunk with the blood of the saints and with the blood of the martyrs of Jesus." A general named Jehu was coming for Jezebel. Jehu was not an ordinary person. He was a type of judgment God had placed upon Jezebel's family. All this came upon Jezebel because of one event, the murder of Naboth. Jezebel had murdered Naboth to steal his property, and the prophet Elijah had placed a curse on her and her family. Naboth was a Jezreelite who owned a vineyard in Jezreel near King Ahab's palace. Ahab wanted to turn Naboth's vineyard into a vegetable garden and offered to compensate Naboth or provide him with a better vineyard elsewhere. However, Naboth refused to give up the property he had inherited from his ancestors. Unable to acquire the vineyard, Ahab became sullen and returned home in a dark and angry mood. Queen Jezebel discovered her husband's discontent and questioned him about the reason for his mood. Ahab told her the story about Naboth. Jezebel assured him that as long as he remained king, he could have whatever he wanted in the world. She then assured him that she would take care of it personally, saying, "Arise and eat. Cheer up. I will get you the vineyard of Naboth the Jezreelite." 1 Kings 21:7. Jezebel proceeded with the necessary arrangements to get rid of Naboth. She forged letters supposedly from the king instructing the city's nobles and elders to proclaim a fast and place Naboth in a prominent place among the people. 2 scoundrels were to be positioned near Naboth with the mission of falsely accusing him of cursing both God and the king. Naboth was to be taken outside the city and stoned to death. Jezebel's diabolical plot against Naboth was successful due to the fact that a death sentence could not be executed based on just one witness. Jezebel had taken the necessary precautions to plant 2 false witnesses, thus complying with the law when it was convenient for her. This is when she could manipulate in a way that made it easy for her to lie, steal, and murder. A particularly odious part of Jezebel's plan was the proclamation of a day of fasting, using a religious ceremony to cover up her murderous intent and ensure that Naboth's presence was vilified to the extreme. When the queen learned that Naboth had died, she informed Ahab that he could now take control of Naboth's vineyard, which Ahab did more than gladly. Because of the shocking murder of Naboth by Ahab and Jezebel, God condemned them both. The prophet Elijah made his way to the monarch to deliver a word from God. In fact, Elijah first crossed paths with Ahab when the king was inspecting the vineyard he had stolen. The prophet asked the people, "Have you not murdered a man and seized his property?" This is what the Lord says, "In the place where dogs lick the blood of Naboth, dogs will lick your blood. Yes, yours." 1 Kings 21:19. Elijah prophesied that the Lord would bring disaster on Ahab's house, and that the Lord would cause every male in Ahab's family to perish and be devoured by wild animals instead of receiving an honorable burial. Ahab, her husband, was killed in a battle against the Syrians. As Elijah's successor and a prophet in his own right, Elisha picked up Elijah's crusade. Elisha installed Jehu as king of Israel. Jehu had already disposed of Jezebel's son Joram. Jehu drew his bow with full strength and shot Joram between the shoulders. The arrow pierced his heart, and he slumped down in his chariot. Here we see Jezebel defying the judgment that is to come. She knew that Jehu had executed her son and that he had thrown his dead body onto Naboth's plot, according to the word of the Lord. She also knew that Jehu was now coming to Jezreel, where she could not help but expect to be next to fall as a sacrifice to Jehu's furious sword. Lord Jezebel heard about this and now sees how she meets her fate. She positioned herself in a window at the entrance of the gate to confront Jehu and defy him. She did not choose to hide as someone would if they were terrified of divine vengeance. Instead, she exposed herself to it and scorned to back down. She mocked fear, saying, "Is it peace, Zimri, murderer of your master?" Jezebel's heart was hardened against God. She did not tremble for Jehu, the instrument of God's vengeance. Instead, she posed to him the menacing question whether Zimri had peace after killing his master. Despite God's hand being against her family, she did not care but flew in the face of the one who was merely the sword in his hand. We are too prone, when we are in trouble, to explode in anger against the instruments of our trouble when we should be submissive to God and only angry with ourselves. She comforted herself in the belief that Jehu's current actions would ultimately result in his own ruin and that he would not find peace in it. He cut her off from all pretensions to peace, and now she thought to cut him off in the same way. Reformers and reprovers who take action may face difficulties, but they should not be afraid. Philippians 1:28. Such steadiness and absence of fear on their part is a clear sign and seal to them of their imminent destruction, but a clear sign to you of deliverance and salvation, and that too from God. She cited a precedent to discourage him from proceeding with this venture. Did Zimri have peace? The Zimri of whom Queen Jezebel speaks was the man coming for her life. Jehu was not Zimri. Zimri was a man who came to the throne through blood and betrayal, and within 7 days was compelled to set the palace on fire over his head and himself within it. Jezebel was essentially telling Jehu, "Can you expect to fare any better?" But this was not a similar case. If the case had been similar, it would have been appropriate to provide him this reminder. For God's judgments on those who preceded us in any sinful way should be warnings to us to be careful not to tread in their footsteps. It was a mistake to compare Jehu with Zimri. While Zimri's actions were motivated solely by his own selfish desires and cruelty, Jehu was anointed by a prophet and carried out his actions by orders from heaven. In comparing people and things, we must be careful to distinguish between the precious and the vile. Jehu called for help against the woman. Unmoved by her threats, he shouted, "Who is with me?" According to Kings 9:32, 2 or 3 eunuchs looked out at him. He was called to do God's work in reforming the land and punishing those who had corrupted it. He now seeks assistance in this task, hoping that there would be others willing to help and support him. He raises the standard and makes a proclamation like Moses, "Who is on the Lord's side?" And the psalmist, "Who will rise up for me against the evildoers? Who will stand up for me against the workers of iniquity?" Psalm 94:16. Note that once the work of reform began, it was time to inquire who was in favor of it. Her own attendants betrayed her and delivered her to him to carry out his rightful vengeance. 2 or 3 eunuchs looked at Jehu with such a countenance that encouraged him to believe they were on his side. To them, he called not to arrest or secure her until further orders, but rather to immediately throw her down.